a skillet sitting on a stove somewhere right now that has been doing this longer than you've been alive. Most mornings, it starts the same way. Someone who knows that kitchen the way they know their own hands moves through it without turning on a light. The coffee goes on, the burner clicks, and the skillet, always the skillet, comes down from wherever it lives, and it settles onto the heat with a sound that is the actual sound of home starting up. Somewhere in the last 30 years, kitchens filled up with bright new things, pans with smooth, pale surfaces and cheerful colors printed on the box. Pans that promised everything would slide right off, effortlessly, without fuss. Pans that were designed, though no one said this out loud, to be replaced. And then there's this. This pan belonged to a woman who raised 5 children on a working man's salary in a house without central air, in a kitchen where the table also served as the homework desk and the place where arguments got finished and birthdays got celebrated with whatever was in the pantry. She never burned a biscuit. She never had a bad batch of cornbread. And when she was gone, the pan was still there, darker than the day she got it, smoother, heavier with use, and it still worked. What she passed down wasn't just cookware, it was a record, a physical record of every meal she ever made. And somehow, impossibly, by the logic of disposable modern things, you can still cook in it today. To understand why cast iron mattered so deeply to the American kitchen, you have to understand the kitchen it lived in. And to understand that kitchen, you have to understand what the decade before it felt like. The years immediately after the Second World War produced something in American domestic life that hadn't quite existed before, a collective exhale. Men came home, factories retooled for peacetime production, and an entire generation, one that had spent years rationing sugar and fat and meat, years of genuine material scarcity, turned toward the idea of home with a hunger that was about more than food. Home meant safety, home meant enough, and the kitchen, more than any other room, was where that feeling lived. It was where the ordinary abundance of peacetime became real and tangible. A roast on Sunday, butter on the table without counting, a percolator that ran every single morning without apology. In working-class homes especially, cast iron wasn't a purchasing decision. It was an inheritance. You cooked in what your mother cooked in, and she cooked in what her mother left her. In many households, there was no conversation about it. No moment of choosing. The pan simply appeared in your kitchen, the way the recipe for biscuits simply appeared in your memory. It was part of what you were given. These were not decorative objects, not conversation pieces. They were working tools. Daily tools, used for breakfast and supper and everything in between. Used on Sunday afternoons when the whole house filled up with the smell of something slow and serious on the back burner. A cast iron skillet in a 1960s kitchen meant heat that held. It meant meals that didn't burn on the outside and stay cold in the middle. It meant food that tasted like someone had thought about it. There was also something practical, something almost stubbornly economical about the way these kitchens were run. A family on a factory worker's income or a farmer's income didn't budget for replacing cookware. You bought things that lasted. And cast iron, properly kept, didn't just last, it improved. It was perhaps the only item in the entire household that got genuinely better the more you used it. That was a concept that resonated deeply with a generation that had lived through the Depression, through the war, through years of making do. The idea that use was not degradation, that use was actually improvement, that must have felt like a small philosophical vindication. Then, mid-decade, the American kitchen began to be sold a different story. Lightweight aluminum, Teflon-coated surfaces that genuinely didn't stick, or didn't, for a while. The marketing language was seductive. Easier, cleaner, lighter, modern. The old black iron sitting on the back burner suddenly had an image problem. It was heavy. It required maintenance. It looked, frankly, like something your grandmother used, which, of course, it was. But in millions of kitchens across the South, across the Midwest, across every rural stretch of every state that still cooked the way it had always cooked, the cast iron didn't move, because the women using it had already weighed the trade, and they knew what the advertisements weren't saying. That a pan built to last a human lifetime, that asked nothing more from you than occasional oil and occasional heat, that cooked better with every passing year, that was simply good arithmetic. And good arithmetic doesn't go out of style. Before the skillet became part of a family, it was born somewhere loud and hot, and nothing like a kitchen. Cast iron is made exactly the way the name suggests. Iron melted down to a liquid state at temperatures approaching 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, is poured into a mold, usually made of compressed sand, and allowed to cool. The process is ancient. The Romans cast iron, medieval European smiths cast iron. The technique that produced your grandmother's skillet in a Tennessee factory in 1948 was not fundamentally different from the technique used 1,000 years before that. There's something about that continuity that feels significant. In a century that produced the automobile and the atom bomb and the television set and the microwave oven, the cast iron pan remained essentially unchanged. Because it was already right. There was nothing to improve. The form had found its function, and the function had found its form, and they fit each other so well that 2,000 years of metallurgical progress didn't find a single thing to correct. The American foundries that produced most of the cast iron cookware of the mid-20th century, Lodge in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, Griswold in Erie, Pennsylvania, Wagner in Sydney, Ohio, were not glamorous operations. They were hot, loud, physically demanding places, but they produced objects of extraordinary durability, objects that, it turned out, would outlast the companies that made some of them, outlast the factories themselves, outlast everyone who worked in them. Griswold, in particular, became something close to a cult object in the decades after the company closed. Their pans, smoother, lighter than most cast iron, machined on the cooking surface to a finish that bordered on elegant, are still sought today by collectors who will pay hundreds of dollars for a pan that originally cost a few cents per pound of iron. There is a kind of justice in that. Something made well enough eventually finds the audience it deserves, even if it takes 50 years. But for most families, the brand didn't matter, and the name wasn't discussed. What mattered was the pan. What mattered was that it worked. What mattered was that on a Tuesday night when you were tired and the children were loud and dinner still had to happen, you could put that skillet on the burner and it would do exactly what it had always done, without complaint, without fuss, without requiring anything more from you than heat and a little fat and whatever you had on hand. That reliability was not a small thing. In a busy household, reliability was everything. Here is something that doesn't get said enough about cast iron. It gets better. The longer you use it, the better it gets. Every single time you cook in it, you improve it. Which makes it one of the only objects in a modern kitchen, possibly one of the only objects in a modern life, where use is not consumption, where using something makes it more, not less. The process is called seasoning, a word that, in this context, has nothing to do with salt or pepper. It's a technical term borrowed from the chemistry of polymers. When you heat fat in a cast iron pan, any fat, oil, lard, bacon drippings, repeatedly over time, the fat undergoes a chemical transformation. The heat causes the oil molecules to bond together and to bond to the iron itself, forming a hard, thin layer that is chemically distinct from either the oil or the metal it coats. Each time you cook, each time you add heat and fat, another layer forms, not thick, visible layers, layers thinner than a human hair, building gradually over months, over years, over the full span of a cooking life. The pan becomes, in the truest physical sense, different from what it was. Darker, smoother, more itself. A well-seasoned pan from 1955, one that was used every day for 40 years, dried carefully, wiped with a thin coat of oil after each use, never left in a sink full of soapy water, is not the same object as the pan that came out of the factory. It is something that pan became, something earned through use, a process with no shortcut, no hack, no way to rush it. Only time and cooking, and more time and more cooking. Which is to say, the best cast iron pans in existence right now are not for sale. They're in people's kitchens. They're hanging on hooks above stoves that have cooked thousands of meals. They belong to someone, and they show it. And then there is the cooking itself, the actual food that comes out of a seasoned cast iron pan and why it tastes the way it tastes. Cast iron holds heat with a persistence that lighter metals can't match. When you preheat a cast iron skillet, and you should always preheat it, that's the first rule. It holds that temperature the way a stone holds warmth from the sun. When you lay a cold piece of chicken into the pan, the temperature barely drops. The iron gives its stored heat to the food immediately, steadily, without flinching. What you get is a crust, a real crust, the kind that forms when heat is applied with conviction, without hesitation, all at once. A non-stick pan, by contrast, recovers slowly. The thin aluminum loses temperature when cold food hits it. The surface gets wet before it gets dry. The food steams before it sears. You can cook perfectly decent chicken in a non-stick pan, but it won't have that crust. That particular thing that happens when high, even heat meets protein and fat and doesn't let go. And cornbread. We should talk about cornbread, because cornbread in cast iron is not simply a regional tradition or a sentimental preference. It is technically superior. The preheated iron creates an immediate crisp crust on the bottom and sides the moment the batter makes contact. The top stays soft, just barely cooked through, slightly yielding. And when you flip it out, which it does, cleanly, because the seasoned surface releases it without argument. The bottom is a shade of gold that you genuinely cannot produce in any other pan. That crust, that specific texture, crisp on the outside, almost cake-soft on the inside, carrying the faint mineral taste of old iron and a decade of rendered fat, is the thing people mean when they say it doesn't taste the same from a modern pan. They're right. It doesn't, because it isn't the same process. It's a different interaction between heat and batter and surface, producing a different result. The fact that the different result is worse is not nostalgia, it's physics. And then there are the long, slow cooks that cast iron was perhaps most made for. A pot roast, browned hard on all sides in the same skillet that will braise it, then set to low with a lid on and left alone for 3 hours. A pot of pinto beans started at 9 in the morning. A chicken stew that asks nothing of you except that you remember to be home before dinner. Cast iron's mass. The sheer weight of the thing, which beginners always remark on and experienced cooks stop noticing, becomes an advantage in long cooking. The iron moderates the temperature. It buffers against the fluctuations in the burner. It creates an environment inside the pot that is stable, even, and patient. The kind of environment that allows connective tissue and cheap cuts of meat to break down slowly into something rich and nearly silky. The kind of cooking that turns the economical choice into the delicious one. The kitchen fills with a smell, not one ingredient, but all of them together, changed by time and heat into something that has no name, but is immediately recognized by everyone who grew up in a house where Sunday cooking happened. Onion gone translucent. Fat rendered and absorbed back into the meat. Iron and steam and something sweet underneath it all. The smell that comes through a door and makes you feel, before you even sit down, that you are about to be taken care of. Cast iron was never evenly distributed across American cooking culture. It had a geography, a cultural center of gravity that, if you drew it on a map, would cover the American South most densely, and then radiate outward through Appalachia and into the Midwest, thinning as you move toward the coasts. In the American South, cast iron wasn't simply common, it was foundational. The entire cuisine depended on it. Cornbread. Biscuits baked in a skillet on the stovetop when the oven was occupied. Fried catfish in iron so hot the fish barely touched the oil before it was sealed. Collard greens cooked low and slow in a cast iron pot with a ham hock since morning. The food of the South and the tools of cast iron developed together, each shaping the other over generations. There was also, embedded in that Southern cast iron tradition, a history that is more complicated and more important than cornbread. The black women who cooked in Southern kitchens, both their own and those of others, were the primary custodians and innovators of American cast iron cooking. The techniques, the seasonings, the methods for managing iron over wood fire and then gas flame were developed and refined in their hands over more than 2 centuries. That history lives in the pan. It's part of the seasoning, in a sense that is not metaphorical. In Midwestern farm kitchens, cast iron served a different but equally central function. The scale of rural cooking, feeding farmhands during harvest, feeding a large family 3 times a day through a hard winter, demanded cookware that could handle serious heat and serious quantity, cast iron Dutch ovens that could hold a full chicken and all its vegetables, skillets wide enough to fry a pan of pork chops all at once without crowding, the kind of cooking where you couldn't afford a tool that wasn't completely reliable. And underneath all of this, underneath the southern skillet cornbread and the Midwestern Dutch oven pot roast and the Appalachian bean soup, was an even older tradition, cast iron cookware designed to hang over an open fire, to travel, to go wherever the family went, and cook whatever was available. The original cast iron cookware of early America was camp cookware, frontier cookware. It was built into the idea of American mobility, American making do, American perseverance. The skillet on your grandmother's stove had ancestors that crossed prairies. There is a ritual to cast iron, a set of practices that gets passed down alongside the pan itself, usually orally, usually in a kitchen, usually while the lesson is in progress. Never leave it wet. That's the first rule, and it is stated with the gravity of something that matters. Cast iron will rust if you leave water sitting in it, not the way other metals rust. Slowly and superficially, but quickly, spreading across the surface, eating into the seasoning. A wet cast iron pan left overnight can need weeks of recovery, so you dry it over heat, and then you oil it, just a thin coat, barely enough to see. You rub it in, let the warmth of the pan work the oil into the surface, and then you put it away. The whole process takes perhaps 4 minutes. It becomes automatic. A part of the end of cooking the way washing your hands is part of the end of cooking. Unremarkable, habitual, almost unconscious. And never, the older generation will tell you with particular emphasis, never let anyone put it in the dishwasher. This is not irrational protectiveness. The combination of alkaline detergent and prolonged hot water will strip the seasoning entirely, leaving the pan gray and raw and requiring significant rehabilitation. This has happened in households across America, usually involving a well-meaning spouse or a house guest who was only trying to help. The aftermath of the dishwasher incident is, in many kitchens, part of the cast iron mythology. The care protocol is also, in some ways, a philosophy. It asks you to think ahead slightly, to do a small, consistent thing in exchange for a large, consistent reward, to maintain rather than replace, to treat an object with enough respect that it will outlast you, which is, if you think about it, an unusual expectation to have of a kitchen utensil and a quietly radical one in a culture built around disposability. And then there are the people who restore them, who find a rusted, neglected skillet at an estate sale or a flea market, gray with oxide, rough with neglect, and bring it back. The restoration process is straightforward but slow. Remove the rust, remove the old degraded seasoning, and begin again. Oil, heat, repeat. Over weeks, sometimes months, the surface rebuilds itself. The pan returns. There is something in that restoration that people find genuinely satisfying in a way that goes beyond the practical. The idea that an object can be that badly neglected and still be recoverable, that the fundamental structure, the iron itself, the form, the function, remains intact beneath the damage. That with enough patience and the right kind of attention, it can be made whole again. Not everything offers that. There's something that happens when people talk about cast iron in any context, online, in person, at a table after dinner, that I find genuinely remarkable. The conversation always, without exception, turns personal. Always. Someone mentions cast iron, and within 2 exchanges someone else says, "I still use my grandmother's." And then a particular kind of silence enters the room. Not an awkward silence, a weighted one. Because everyone in that room either has a version of that story or carries the specific absence of not having one. People have written, and you may have heard versions of these stories, about estate sales where the cast iron was the only item that generated a dispute, about families who agreed easily about furniture and photographs and jewelry, but came to genuine, Heated conflict over a 12-inch skillet that their mother cooked Sunday breakfast in for 4 decades. About wills that specifically, by name, by size, assigned individual cast iron pieces to individual children, because the person writing the will understood that if they didn't, there would be a problem. That is not about a pan. Let's be clear about that. Nobody is fighting over iron. They are fighting over access to a feeling, a specific, irreplaceable feeling of sitting in a warm kitchen while someone who loved you unconditionally made something ordinary, and the ordinary thing tasted better than anything you have eaten since, and you couldn't explain why even then. And now you are old enough to understand that the explanation is not about ingredients or technique. The pan is the closest physical object to that feeling. It holds the same heat in the same way. It produces the same sounds, the same smells. It is, in a material sense, the same thing that was there. And holding it, cooking in it, filling a kitchen with the smell of something sizzling in old iron for a moment, that feeling is not entirely in the past. It is present, just for a moment, in the steam and the sizzle and the particular weight of the handle in your hand. People say, no modern pan makes cornbread taste the same. And they are right, as we have discussed, partly because of the iron, partly because of the accumulated seasoning, but also, honestly, because of something that cannot be measured or replicated by any material process. They are doing what their grandmother did, in the same vessel, with the same approximate motion. They are inside a continuity, and food cooked inside a continuity, food that is part of a long, unbroken thread of the same meal, made the same way across generations, tastes different than food cooked without one. That difference is real. It is not imagination, it is the taste of context. And cast iron, more than any other kitchen object, holds context. We live in a particular moment in the history of objects. A moment that is extraordinarily good at making things and extraordinarily efficient at disposing of them. The average lifespan of a non-stick pan, accounting for the degradation of the coating, the scratching, the eventual inability to release food cleanly, is perhaps 3 to 5 years. Some last less. They go into a landfill. The coating, which was the entire point of them, is a polymer that does not break down. The pan that promised to make your life easier is now simply permanent in the worst sense, inert and indestructible in a hole in the ground. There is a cast iron skillet sitting in a kitchen somewhere that is 100 years old and still being used every day. It has been seasoned by multiple generations of hands. It has cooked meals for people who are no longer living, for children who are now grandparents, for occasions that are now family legend. It has moved between houses, survived moves, been wrapped in newspaper and packed with care and unpacked, and immediately hung back up in the kitchen because the kitchen doesn't feel right until it's there. It will outlast the person using it now. It will be passed to someone. It will continue. There is a concept that gets used in discussions of ecology and architecture and design. The idea of objects that are in right relationship with time. Objects made at the right scale from the right materials, with the right intentions, such that they fit naturally into a human lifespan without damaging the world they inhabit. Cast iron cookware, it turns out, was doing this 100 years before anyone had language for it. Made from one of the most abundant materials on Earth, requiring no synthetic coatings, no proprietary replacement parts, no manufacturer support, repairable by anyone with a little oil and a little patience, and improving, always improving, with use. Your grandmother's skillet, if you were lucky enough to receive it, wise enough to keep it, is not finished. It is not a relic. It is not something to display on a shelf while you cook in something easier. It is waiting for Saturday morning, and the cold oil warming, and the first strip of bacon curling at the edges. It is waiting for the first cold Sunday in October, when a pot of something slow should be on the stove by noon. It is waiting to accumulate a little more history, a little more seasoning, a little more of whatever it means to have been useful. And one day, after enough Saturdays, enough October Sundays, enough Tuesday night dinners and holiday breakfasts and ordinary meals that were the best meals anyone ever had, you will be the one whose kitchen smelled a certain way. And someone who sat at your table will spend years, maybe decades, trying to get back to that smell, trying to find it in a kitchen of their own. Give them the pan. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Not about cast iron, about your kitchen, about what's actually in it. What is the oldest object in your kitchen right now? Not the most expensive, not the most useful, not the one you reach for most often. The oldest. The one with a history you know by heart because someone told it to you. Probably in a kitchen very much like this one. Did it come from someone? A mother, a grandmother, an aunt, who pressed it into your hands when you moved out for the first time and said simply, "You'll need this." Is there a piece of cookware somewhere in your home that you would not replace? Not because it's irreplaceable in any practical sense, but because replacing it would mean something you're not ready for it to mean. Leave it in the comments. Tell me what it is, and who it came from, and what you make in it. I read them, and I'll see you in the kitchen.